Welcome, Sarah. Thank you so much for agreeing to be interviewed. Just to start out, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you discovered homeopathy.
Hi, Angela. Thanks so much for inviting me. So I'm a practicing homeopath. I've been practicing in private practice for 12 years. I got started on homeopathy when I was living in Amsterdam in my mid-20s, and I was getting frequent sinus infections. And one day I got really sick, and my boyfriend at the time went down to the pharmacy, and in Amsterdam, all the pharmacies have homeopathy, but I just hadn't used it before. And he came home with all these little white pills in this kind of package, and I had to take half a vial of each at different times. And anyway, I'd always been so susceptible. Pharmaceuticals just never really gelled with me, and I always had really, I might get better, but I always felt all the side effects, so I'm quite sensitive. Anyway, I took these little white pills, and I just got better, quickly, with none of the hangover feeling of a pharmaceutical, something that might clear the sinuses. And I mean, I had some gut issues back then too, and so I wouldn't go near antibiotics. So I was just blown away. It was like, wow, what is this? And then I kind of put that aside, and eventually because I'm in Australia, so I traveled back to Australia. And it wasn't until I had my first son, and he was having some issues with sleep and nappy rash, and I was actually having postpartum thyroiditis. So where the thyroid goes from hypo to hyper to hypo and eventually evens out. But I was in a hyperthyroid stage, and I actually was doing sleep school with my son because of his horrible sleeping. And somebody said, I went to this sleep school actually, and I remember they were doing just the control crying method. And I was like, oh no, I want to do something else. And they were like, well, that's all we do. So I sat in this sleep school for 3 days virtually doing what I would have done at home. Anyway, one of the other ladies there that I got to know said, oh, you should go and see a homeopath. I know a homeopath. I was like, oh, there's that word again. And so I did. And so my thyroid evened out, and my son, I just remember he was getting crazy nappy rash, and the homeopath prescribed probably, I don't even know what, but I'm thinking it was Medorrhinum. He would blister within minutes, and be screaming. And I gave him the remedy, and virtually within half an hour, it's like his skin went from blistered to completely healed. It was like one of those, what happened? Oh my God. It was just, it's like magic. Sometimes I feel like homeopathy can be like magic because it does do things so much quicker and so much more gently than other modalities that I know of. Anyway, so my interest was piqued for sure. And then I actually had a career change at that time. I was ending the career that I was doing, and a friend said, oh, you should have a look at studying naturopathy. And I was looking at the college to study naturopathy, and then I was like, oh, there's homeopathy. Actually, I might do that as a hobby side interest. And as soon as I started the course, I was just like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And I just couldn't stop. So it was a 6-year course, and I just kept going. And with homeopathy, you actually never stop learning. So I'm still going. And that, I guess I started this journey with study 18 years ago, and still just absolutely loving it. So that's how I started, and the love affair continues, I would say.
Cool. Well, can you talk a little bit about that, about your case taking and then your prescribing process?
Yeah, sure. So as I mentioned, I see a lot of complex neurodevelopmental cases. And so the case taking, I'm a classically trained homeopath, so I work like that, but I'm also an intuitive homeopath. And so moving into the space of really noticing, taking a case in the very, traditional classical way, quite thorough, going into the birth, pre-birth, pre-pregnancy, I should say, pregnancy, family history, personal history, all the emotional stuff. But also, you know, in taking a case, really acknowledging not just what we're hearing the client say and maybe that we might have observed, or if we have the patient in the room, any kind of clinical examination, but also going into what it feels like to be with that client and what else they're saying on those subtle levels. And, you know, with nonverbal children, of course, the parent is expecting the child, you know, well, ideally the child would tell us their symptoms, but they can't. And so really working with the parents to unpick what it feels like, because the parents are so linked and so connected to their children that if we can find a way, which, you know, we have, to get them to tap into what it's like to be the child. And as at the same time, I'm quite sensitive, like I'm tapping into the child and what I'm noticing. So it's kind of this interplay between me and the parent and feeling into what's happening. I mean, some of the kids with PANS and PANDAS, even though they might be verbal, they'll never speak to me because they won't want to get on a screen, or they won't even leave the house sometimes. So, you know, we have to finding other ways to work. So I do something called a bit of a sensation process, but it's like a guided meditation. So I just guide the parent to feel into, because I get the parent to close down their eyes and feel into what it's like to be the child, and what else, and what just anything that comes up really is relevant. You know, in homeopathy, we can often follow a case by the words that people say, or, you know, but we're also about the emphasis on those words, or what emotion shifts. If we see a parent, you know, their emotion comes, whether they get irritable or whether they cry and get really emotional, we know that there's energy in those places. And so they're places that will often go anyway in the consult. When you get the parent to close down their eyes, they generally stop telling the story that they might tell the biomed doctor or anything like that, and they just go in to the feeling. And when we can get those kind of feelings and sensations, we can find remedies that can go a little bit deeper into what's really going on for this child. And I can give an example of that because I just spoke to a client and her child is 9 now, and this child is displaying symptoms of having PANDAS. His handwriting has severely declined in the last 6 months. He has kind of some rages. He's got a lot of anxiety and won't sleep like finding it really difficult to sleep at night. And he had seen another homeopath, and they'd given the remedies that you would expect to be given. Like there was like, you know, there was very much, yes, I can see why, but they didn't do anything, these remedies. And so when I got the mother to close down her eyes and following, kind of intuitively following the energy of the case, she, you know, the strong feeling that came is this kid had actually the birth of this child was so traumatic, which, you know, sadly is not uncommon. But this child was, you know, pushed, he was induced. And then, of course, I mean, I don't think she was ripe enough, I guess, for that baby to be born. And so she reached a certain point of dilation, and then she was told to push, and then he was stuck. And they ended up using forceps. I can't remember if they used the ventouse or not either. But anyway, he was pretty much ripped out to the point that his face was bruised, that he had an indent on one side of his head. And her tailbone was broken, and she was torn all over the place. I mean, it's just... So, but the thing that came up in this process was, I am terrified. I'm pulled into the world like being battered and bruised. And so, you know, addressing that in a child as a primary cause, which you wouldn't, you know, the mother did talk about the birth trauma, but it really came up as a really strong thing. You know, we can get so many symptoms when we take a case, but this was like, I'm traumatized. And so addressing that at the same time as addressing possibly the strep, and, perhaps, looking, and also a constitutional type remedy. And I say that in inverted commas because we all know that it's, generally, we can have remedies that work well for us for a long period of time or that we can come back to, but in terms of a constitutional remedy in the way that we're originally taught, is that remedy that will work for you forever, like that doesn't always apply really. In fact, that changes a lot as we go through our lives, and it might not be needed. So anyway, that's an aside. But so, kind of working with this kid in dealing, this felt like the most important part of the case to start with, and then working with the infection layer, the strep in this case. And we will get to more of the trauma or more of the, what it's like for him. But that feeling was so strong that it needs to be addressed. Like, this child has already had constitutional homeopathic treatment that didn't do anything with remedies that were actually really well indicated. Like I might have chosen them myself before I started really kind of opening it up and going a bit deeper with this method of tapping in. So yeah, that's kind of one case example, I guess. But my approach, I guess, is intuitive, and it's going deep, and it's really, I think we all do this as homeopaths, but we don't always acknowledge how much we're picking up on all the other levels. So what we pick up when we sit with someone, what we notice, just because they don't say it doesn't mean it's not a really important symptom. So we have to kind of be really in tune with all of that, I think. And not always, sometimes there's really healthy people and or they're sick at the moment, but they've had a pretty good base, and you give them a remedy and they just get better. But often with these complex children's cases, it's actually, it actually precedes the lifetime of this child and goes back into the parent, and their state of health or their trauma, and perhaps before that too. So, this is one of the other things I think that's informing the health state of a lot of these children, is what they've inherited and how that's been managed in Western medicine. And we talk about miasms and things too, that we inherit, and we do. And I think that the Hahnemannian miasms, and then you've got the Sankaran's miasms that have expanded on that. And I feel like that's such a huge area to address, but that we've got more miasms. Probably we'll have a COVID miasm, I'd say, definitely. It'll be interesting to see in another 5 or 10 years, like where that sits.
And this might just be, a novice question, but in that case, is it not valuable for everyone to get constitutional care or classical care? And in that classical care, is there an understanding that you address it, therefore it does not pass down to the next generation, or is it always going to be there and need addressing?
Well, that's such a good question, even though you say it's a novice question, because it's a big question. And I think there's, some people want to do all the healing they can in this lifetime, and other people are fine if their symptoms go away. And if their symptoms go away, are we really addressing the miasm? Are we really kind of sorting that out for the next generation? Like, no, not all the time we are. I like to think that we can change patterns, but it doesn't require that one prescription and symptoms going away. It requires a little bit more, work. And that's not for everyone in this lifetime, I think. And that's totally fine. Like, we all come to it at a different point. But, I do think it's possible to shift these kind of familial patterns and ancestral traumas and that kind of thing. It's tough.
Well, yes, even just thinking about your case, is it, the fact that he had such a traumatic birth, your understanding would be that because he's had that trauma he was therefore more susceptible to getting this strep PANDAS reaction later in life when he was 9 years old?
Well, no, actually, there's a bit of a family history of some immune issues. So that is, and that's a big thing, actually. That's a massive thing. And, you know, when we see autoimmunity in the family history, and then we go ahead and if we start out a child's life with a lot of medical interventions, we are really messing with the immune system from a very young age, even pre-birth. You know, there's a lot of interventions. And when you've got an immune system that's already a little bit disordered, that in itself is a bit of a recipe of moving to PANS and PANDAS for sure.
Yeah. Your cases that you get, do you usually find that you resolve them 80%, 90%, 100% all the time? Like, how is that playing out in your practice? Yeah.
So, you know, it's interesting because I'm in a study group with a lot of biomedical doctors here in Australia, and I remember them saying that work with complex children, that they, you know, that their kind of success rate is 30%, and I was gobsmacked because I feel like if my success rate was 30%, I would probably leave and do something else because that wouldn't really feel like it was enough to me. So I feel like, first of all, with the children, I think there's a lot of success, and you know, I've kind of put it around 70 to 80%. But what is success in the measure of it? You know, so complete resolution of symptoms is totally possible, but it takes, you know, there's a whole alignment that needs to happen between me and the client and how far they want to go. Like, if they don't want to do anything, if their child is eating really crap food, and we're doing all the remedies, but the diet is just terrible, and that's really, you know, there's only so far we can go. So if they want to kind of implement things, and I'm not hardline like some of the like some practitioners about that, but it's important, you know, you can't be putting a lot of crap food in and expecting a level of vitality, especially when that level of vitality is already low. So yeah, I always kind of gauge it on how far we can go. But, you know, sometimes, and I don't want to, you know, because sometimes with these podcasts, you know, we always have these amazing success stories, and, you know, it's not always like that. You know, there's a lot of work, but there are some times when you'll give that first remedy and the parent will write and say, oh my God, I have my child back. And, you know, and then just like that, I mean, that's the magic, isn't it, of homeopathy, when all these things kind of align at the right time and then the remedy comes in. Sometimes that's because the parent's already done a lot of groundwork, and in terms of, you know, they've implemented good routines and at home, and, you know, they're really holding the space for that child. So, yeah, so there's kind of a lot of factors, but I think probably, yeah, 70 to 80% is what I feel like.
I love
and
that.
Then the 20, yeah.
And how long does that normally take, I guess, for, you know, for a typical case?
Yeah, so that really depends too. So if it's a really complex, you know, case, like if it's like a nonverbal gut issues, you know, kind of that kind of case, then that could be, you know, maybe a bit longer. If it's, oh gosh, it really just depends. But, you know, some families, I've been seeing the child for 2 years, but they might have been that family that had that straight away first remedy kind of wow response. But that family also recognized, we've got work to do here, and I've seen how great this is. How great can it? How far can we go? You know, so that really depends on the family. So, you know, I've got families that I've worked with for a few years, and, you know, we're just constantly fine-tuning, and that parent just wants to check in and they just want the healing journey to continue, really. We don't need to see each other that much. And, you know, it's really wonderful, I think, when parents with kids start to learn about the remedies themselves and really start to use them for their kids, because if their child is having, like in the case of PANS and PANDAS, if they're having a flare, that they'll know what to do. Or in the case of autism and their child gets sick and can't tell them the symptoms, that they know the remedies and they can, you know, be there to give them to their kids. And I think in that way, actually, the Banerji protocols are really good for parents, right? Because they can just, you know, tap into that. And I mean, it's actually really hard to prescribe for your own kids, I think, sometimes. But for acute things, once you kind of get the, you know, the gist of, or even the scope of what you can do, and to feel confident to do that. And, you know, every time a child or a person takes a remedy, their vital force is boosted. Like, and that's what I say to the parents too. Every time, don't worry right or wrong. Sometimes you might not get the right remedy. Often that nothing happens, but, you know, don't kind of give up at that point, because every time you give a remedy, you are boosting your child's vital force. And I firmly believe that, because I've just seen kids' immune systems just get, you know, better and stronger and more resilient, and not, you know, falling down that same hole that they would have fallen down before, with if every little cold turns into a chest infection kind of thing.
Make sure I say this right. So in the cases, I mean, you work with autistic cases. I mean, is there a complete resolution of those cases ever? Or is it like there is a baseline for autism and you're going to, you know, manage a lot of the kind of stressful symptoms, but the child will still be autistic? I'm not super versed in that. Yeah. Spectrum.
So that really depends. But yes, no, I have seen complete resolution. But you know, again, that question mark around complete resolution. But if the child is functioning in the world, if they're able to go to school, if they are able to have relationships and navigate that, if they are, you know, I mean, they might still have a little bit of rigidity, but if they're, I mean, there's probably so many undiagnosed autistic people out there that function in the world, and it doesn't really matter about that diagnosis. So, you know, we just kind of look at that as a benchmark. And I guess that is complete resolution, you know, that your child can show up at school. I mean, in some cases of autism, you know, like it's more that the parent wants the child. I mean, I have got a case, although he is actually talking now, which is amazing. Before he had echolalia, so he would just repeat and he would sing a lot. It was actually really beautiful, because they're an Indian family, and he would sing all the devotional songs when he came in. And actually now he's talking, but he, you know, there's a lot of work to do there in terms of getting him to a place of full functioning in a normal mainstream school. He you know, it's, and that family's done a lot of work as well with biomedicine too. But but they're very happy, because he now does talk, and he does kind of regulate himself a lot more, and he is functioning and he's learning, and he probably will always need their assistance. But, you know, we keep going and we see, I mean, you just never know. And he's a really healthy kid, and, you know, he's a really, I mean, that was so beautiful last time I saw him, for him to say, hello, Sarah, and wave at me from, you know, and, you know, even look at me, which had never happened before. So, you know, it's that kind of spectrum of how far you can go. Because I think in this life, it's not everyone's journey to be totally to come out of that and be totally neurotypical. Like you know, and of course it's always managing those expectations, because a lot of parents go, if their child gets a diagnosis like autism, they just go, right, we're just going to throw everything at this. We're going to fix this child. You know, it is possible, and it is possible, but it's not always there's sometimes the life journey that is, this is my child and I'm just loving them as they are as well, because we're not all, we don't all need to fit into that same little band of expectation of what we're supposed to be like, I don't think. So, I guess that's a roundabout way of answering that question. But I think it's really beautiful when you see a parent kind of also come into acceptance that this is what's happened. This is the child that they're born with. And actually that can be so healing. You can see leaps and bounds in progress from that kind of heart-centered connection from a parent to their child of full acceptance.
Oh, I love it. Well, are you guys are y'all the specialists? I know I've heard of Angela Lemke and you guys through Eugenia. Like, are y'all it, or does every homeopath able to handle this, or like a little bit of guidance on that too?
When I studied homeopathy, my lecturers would say, no, you don't specialize. You just take the case, you take the symptoms, you repertorize it, and you get the remedy. It really was kind of taught to us like that. And I found that with these really complex cases, that wasn't the case. And in fact, when you have parents coming to you and they talk about all the other things that they've done and you've got no idea what that is, and, even the tests, like one of my little segues was understanding all the testing and actually doing testing myself on kids too. So, oat testing or stool testing, which I became really fascinated, especially with stool testing, with heavy metal testing and mineral status, all of that stuff, which, is kind of really biomedical approach. But I feel like it's important to understand that. It's important to understand what your clients have been through. And I actually started to really focus on this area of practice because I would find somebody would come with a different, like I'd get a man with rheumatoid arthritis, which is not what I was used to treating. And I could spend hours researching about rheumatoid arthritis, about the medications that he was on, about the side effects and how they might affect him and all of that kind of stuff. And so, you can't do that for every client. And so the more that we know, we work with something in particular, then the more we know what's important in a case, the more we see the patterns of what's presenting in this child. And, obviously one of the important things about homeopathy is understanding the PQRS symptoms, which is the peculiar, queer, rare, and strange. So which actually I have heard other people say peculiar, queer, rare, maybe, or not put the strange on. Anyway, that's how I learned it, PQRS. So we're always looking for the really individual aspects. But how do you know what's in, you might think, if you hadn't seen a PANS or PANDAS kid, you might think the fear at night was a really significant thing, and you might repertorize that and find the rubrics. But actually it's a really common thing in PANS and PANDAS. So do we need to repertorize that? Not really. Do we, understanding how strep shows up in the body, and seeing the patterns of that in these kids, then we might actually work with the strep by giving the strep nosode, for example. Working out, showing how different parasites show up in the body, different Lyme infections show up in the body, and the behavior, like including the behavior, because that's a really important aspect, or the mental emotional symptomatology. So, seeing how those things show up and knowing that. So I think it is really important to go to someone who knows about these illnesses. And like for myself, my oldest son, who's just about to turn 18, he had, actually I didn't know, and I was taking him to a lot of homeopaths and we were hitting dead ends. And I really knew, this is when I'd already started studying homeopathy, but I knew there were the answers. I knew homeopathy had the answers, but nobody was really leading me there. So, remedies would work, but then they'd stop. And I just felt like understanding and accessing them. And I think this is, perhaps with any condition, like unless unless we kind of understand all the aspects of that. So he definitely had PANDAS, but he was never treated for that. It was these kind of infections and the way they sit in the body weren't really addressed. And, you know, we kind of got so far, but it wasn't until I started to go, I realized, oh my gosh. And that was actually after I started specializing in it that I went, oh my gosh. And I think this is the reason I was attracted to this area as well, because my son was showing all these peculiar signs and symptoms. And, you know, I was just like, I know homeopathy can help kids with this. So, you know, and yeah, starting to clear those infections for him, that really kind of helped him on his way, as well as really getting a bit deeper and understanding what was going on for him, which I did with Angelica as well, like which she did the sensation process with me so that we could kind of understand a little bit deeper. So, yeah, there's been some wonderful remedies that have helped him on his way, and ones that you wouldn't have on face value have said that child fits that remedy, you know. So,
well, so then how do you feel about the Banerji protocols? Just because, you know, for reference, are they dangerous to give? Are they, you know, are they okay in some cases? Do you need to look deeper and individualize, that kind of thing?
No, I definitely don't think they're dangerous. And I think that I actually really like them. And I haven't studied it. And I did have one of my colleagues studied the protocols, and I was fascinated because of, especially they went into a lot of pathophysiology, I think, in the course that she studied to understand which remedies to give. And I know that they were tested on lots of people in India. And no, I think they're a really great go-to. And as I said, you know, every remedy, I believe, helps a vital force. So if this makes it accessible to people to be able to give to their kids or their family or even their clients, then I think it's really great to do that. It's just not something that I've studied. I didn't go to, maybe I will still, you know, and do, because I know my colleague did a 2-year course in the Banerji protocols. And I think it's really great for those kind of tools. Absolutely.
And then, so just then from your perspective, if you had someone coming to you said, okay, I tried some homeopathy on my own, it didn't, you know, it did so much and then it stopped. Does that complicate your case taking, or can you start from there and go forward?
Oh yeah. No, it doesn't complicate it at all. And in fact, it's quite good because they're familiar with remedies and they've tried a few things, and we know, okay, what's worked and what hasn't worked. And then, you know, you can go from there. And people that have come from other homeopaths, we can, you know, it's like, okay, what's worked, what hasn't worked? I don't want to go over old territory, because, you know, we do, as a classical homeopath, we do have these systems that we follow and some things that'll really stand out. But if it hasn't worked, well, there's no point giving it again. We have to look at other ways to access, you know, to lift the vital force in the case of this person. So, no, I really like, I guess the work that I do, because I really feel like the Banerji protocols can really support the physical body. And, you know, and go into the emotional stuff a little bit, but not as deep as I would go. So really it's like a hand in hand. They doing all of that work whilst going to the deeper stuff. You know, the parent can still be doing all of that. They can still go, oh, we've had a gluten reaction and we might give this, and, you know, or we've got this cold and so I'll give this, and or there's this skin eruption and we'll go for this. And I think that's really great to do at the same time. Or even, you know, we're working through this with the Banerji protocols, but we've got this other thing that's not shifting, you know, how can we work on that? And, you know, another thing is that I think, like with my children, I do treat them all the time, but for the deeper stuff, you know, you see everything in your own child, and then you might read it in a book and go, yes, that's them. But you kind of do need a bit of an objective person to go, yeah, that could be them, and I can see what you're saying, but actually the essence right now is this over here. And so, you know, the deeper work I think is good to hand over to a homeopath, or, you know, or a practitioner that you like to see. Yeah, because as I said, like I see everything with my kids and I'll be like, oh, yes, it's that. And I do muscle testing as well. And so, but then it won't be that. And it's just like, oh, okay. It's kind of easier to do that with, I find it easier to do that with other people than with my own kids. Although sometimes I'll go, yeah, no, I think that my child needs that, and they will. And, you know, and that's a beautiful.
Do you muscle test all your remedies?
So I kind of muscle test. I guess I have I pull together my left brain knowledge and my right brain intuition. So when I say muscle test, it's more watching when I have sat with a client. Usually I'll take a case and I'll write down everything that I've thought, or it's not even just remedies that I've thought, but families or groups or words that are really important, or feelings that I've had, or observations that I've had about the exchange that are really important. And so then what I'll do is I basically run through and see which one resonates. So I have a long history with a meditation practice of noticing shifts in my body when I with different things over my life, I guess, experiences and emotional states and that kind of thing. And I think that's what I use really. So, you know, somebody might come and it seems like pulsatilla, but it doesn't quite feel right. You know, sometimes you can just go, oh, but it's not quite exactly right. But then what else would I give? And so, you know, it's like expanding out from there, and instead of giving pulsatilla, giving ranunculus, you know, because ranunculus, actually, that's the one that ticks the box. That's the one that lights me up, so to speak. So, I mean, I guess it's always hard to explain the intuitive process, but it's more like that. It's more, yes, that could work, but it's not an absolute yes for me. So where else, what is going to be a yes? And I generally won't prescribe until I get the yes. I mean, I do some physical work, and I think that's physical work in terms of sometimes I'll do an organ support remedy or a yeast clearing remedy, or, you know, a bowel nosode to, you know, shift what's going on in the physical level. Sometimes you actually have to shift a bit on the physical level before you can even really understand the whole case and what's going on. But yeah, so there'll be a bit going on at the same time. And I think actually that's what we connected about originally, was that I was talking about working, you know, similar to a Vanier approach, when there might be a miasm, a constitution, but the word constitution could also be exchanged with the word totality, in terms of the totality of what we're seeing right now with this case, and then a remedy for the skin, or for, you know, the organ support, or for, you know, for the yeast or something like that. I hope I answered that question.
I think you got it in there, yeah. So hit me with some of your, you know, great stories that are just going to have people, you know, knocking down your. I can't imagine that you're not already just overrun with clients, but some more so we can really just burn the roof down.
I do have. So one client, actually, she is a PANDAS kid. And actually, she was one of the ones where the first remedy that she had was, okay, now I've got my child back. And she just had a lot of fear and anxiety. She had a lot of sensory issues. And she has a fear of zippers. These certain kind of fears and things can come up in PANDAS. And actually, you know, I think PANDAS is something that there's not enough awareness about, because it can show up in such subtle ways in kids. This case is from a few years ago, so I have to, I can't remember all the details. But so the hyoscyamus was the remedy that first shifted her, and she really kind of lifted out of that state, and the mum was just so happy because the fears died down. And we did go up with higher thymus, a potency or 2. I think we might have started at 200 and then gone to 1M, and then, no, we didn't go to 10M, we shifted. And then some of the fears came back, and I think she also had some gut issues, and we gave calc carb, and she actually really shifted again. And actually calc carb, you know, in terms of that constitutional thing, she's somebody who actually always does go back to calc carb, until recently where I've shifted her onto another mollusk, I think, from memory. So she's, you know, she's done really well. But along the way, we've also worked on the strep. She actually had a lot of allergens. And so we've worked through the allergens with indicated remedies, but also clearing things like she did have, and using histaminum. Histaminum's a lovely sarcode for helping to support an allergic response or a mast cell activation syndrome kind of response, where the allergies are just so persistent. And she also had some skin issues, mainly some fungal things behind her ears, which Graphites has been really good for that too. So, you know, it's kind of been like this constitutional prescription, and then, you know, kind of putting out the little fires that come up with other things, and clearing infections with things like strep. She's currently actually starting Borrelia, which is the Lyme nosode, Borrelia burgdorferi, and to clear, because she does get headaches, and she also gets these strange pains in her ankles. And there can be a bit of joint pain with Lyme disease, as many people might know. But I do truly believe that it's the constitutional prescription that works to really support all the other little prescriptions that are happening. Another case of a little girl who also has PANDAS, and she started with me. She was 6 years old. She was still wetting the bed every night. She had a bit of fear. We were still in lockdown in Australia. This was a client from Australia, and we were still in lockdown in Australia then. And she was a bit fearful about going back to school. She was also hitting on her brother a bit. And I gave her, and she was having some rages and tantrums. She had cuprum metallicum, so copper. Actually, she had carcinosin cum cuprum, so that's carcinosin with copper. And the tantrums really slowed down. But one of the beautiful remedies that I really love, which I've just found so good for bedwetting, is borax in a 6C, and which addresses the yeast, actually. And I would say, I used to spend a lot of time repertorizing about bedwetting and really looking at the constitution. And I spent a lot of time doing that, actually, over the years. And then I started using borax in a 6C to help with yeast. And I noticed that the bedwetting would stop. And so that is like a key thing. And sometimes if it doesn't, I will look at other yeast remedies, or if there's parasites. Sometimes parasites can be related to bedwetting issues as well. So, and bedwetting's so, you know, it's not uncommon. And so, you know, addressing yeast, addressing parasites through different remedies, the remedies that match the most. But borax 6C or something else that, like Candida albicans, that can clear yeast, or looking at parasites, it can be really good. Anyway, back to this child. So she actually really calmed down on the carcinosin cum cuprum, and the bedwetting completely stopped, and she stopped kind of laying into her brother, but she went into a real, and this is what can happen with PANS and PANDAS, we can clear that and then something else comes up, because there can be multiple layers of infections here. And when I say infections, I don't mean that we always have to clear them with a nosode, mind you. We can use all of the other remedies that we have at our disposal. So it could be a plant, an animal, a mineral, a nosode, anything like that. So, but she went into this state of being really fearful and really fearful of, the cupboard door being open and where's mum, and kind of ghosts a little bit as well, and not being able to go to sleep on her own. And I'd given her, I can't remember what I gave her first, but in a consult with the mother, the thing that really came through was, I'm really scared of all the things that sit in the shadows. And I'm trying my best. She's such a delightful little girl, because she would show up and she'd be so smiley. But, it was like you could see the look on her face, like this awareness of what sits in the dark cupboard, what's in the shadow. And I gave her mandragora, which is a remedy that is in the Solanaceae family, so with the belladonna and stramonium. And she, that completely just shifted her, because she had this really strong awareness of the shadow side. Actually, Massimo Mangialavori, who's an Italian homeopath, wrote a book about the Solanaceae and about the kind of different points at which we are aware of the shadow, or the people that might need these remedies are aware of the shadow. So the mandragora is really aware of the shadow, the really scary stuff, but really puts on a smiley face and, is kind of like, I know it's there, but I'm not going to look at it. I'm actually fine, kind of thing. Whereas as we move along to belladonna, they're not compensating as much. They're kind of in it. And stramonium is way in the shadow. They're like, I can't actually, it's all around me. I'm seeing it. You can see it. I'm not even pretending that I'm pretending that it's not there, kind of thing. So, this little girl had just shifted out of that mandragora state and, happily went on her way. So she's not bedwetting anymore, and she wasn't totally fearful, and she wasn't, beating up on her brother anymore. And that little girl, we have had to work through strep, and we're currently working through Bartonella, which is another Lyme co-infection. So, there's different layers, but we can really see these things shift. And actually, she's just doing really well, So we're doing the cleaning up work now, so to speak. Let me think. Do you want another case?
Yes, absolutely. If you've got time, I've got time. Yes.
I have a case. This is a wacky one, I guess, of T-Rex, because there is a remedy made from a fossilized T-Rex bone. I know, who would have thought? Yeah. Well, if you think about the reptiles, and to me, T-Rex is like the reptile of all reptiles, really. It's like the origin of the reptiles. And this little girl, also a PANDAS child, she would have these rages, but within the rages that she had, she would barricade herself in the room and let nobody in there, which is a little bit unusual, because usually they need to go at someone. They need to let someone know how angry. And it wasn't that she wasn't letting someone know how angry she was, but she'd barricade herself in the room or in a box, and she'd be kind of looking out and, don't get near me, don't come close to me. If someone did, she would just strike out. And I mean, she had things like, she would also, as one of her OCD things, would be pulling out her eyelashes, and a whole range of other things. Her sleep was pretty good, but there was a lot of kind of anxieties and fears and rages. And she really sat in this complete fight or flight state. And we'd actually given some other snake remedies, actually, which had been good for her. I think Crotalus cascavella had been good from it was taking the edge off, but it wasn't doing as much as I would have liked. And so when I gave her the T-Rex, she really stopped that behavior. Like she really, really she stopped the barricading. We actually haven't seen it. So that would have been over a year ago. This is still a client of mine, but we haven't seen that kind of rage. And that kind of behavior. I think the eyelash pulling also has pretty much stopped as well.
Interesting. So in these cases where T-Rex worked, this time those things have resolved, do you then, say, do you see that as like, okay, a layer's been pulled off, let's look at this next layer and we're definitely going to do a different remedy, or we're going to keep with that T-Rex for a while to see if it keeps working? How do you look at that?
Yeah, no, yeah, that's right. The layer is gone if it's not presenting like that. And often the thing with PANS and PANDAS cases in particular is that, something else might appear, come to the top, I guess, and that's now what we're working with. So that little girl, she's currently... there's more fear and anxiety that's kind of come to the top. I mean, and that fight, flight, that was fear and anxiety, but with rage, whereas the rage isn't happening now. We're just dealing with another little thing, but she's going really well. I think she had some time of having a stomach ache in the middle of the night. And there was she's actually had quite a few reptile remedies, this girl, that she's done really well with.
And these are all in your software?
Well, no, I guess not. Some of these, no. We have Angelica actually wrote this book. It's actually a chart. It's a book of charts of remedies. And it's a really good resource, but it's written, she's kind of put reptiles together. So there's a whole lot of reptile remedies and what they are. And so then you'll see them in, kind of muscle test in a way through the book and see what resonates. I mean, I also have a really great reptile book written by Vermeulen. But, you would never find those remedies just by repetizing. They would never come up, ever. So, that's the limitation with our repetizing software, or even just with one materia medica. And also without kind of feeling into the case and really kind of feeling what it's like to be that child or that person when they're in that state. Because really with homeopathy, we're always matching, like you were saying, with the rust tox and the poison ivy and how that, and then we see the person, that's what we're doing. And just because they don't come up obviously a lot of the remedies in our classic materia medicas are really well proved and had provings done over and over. But there, we don't all sit in the scope of those remedies. And even though they can be so wonderful and deep acting, sometimes there's some other things to do, which, I think with the complex kids, there's a number of layers to work with. And often actually the parents of the complex kids will go, you know what, I actually have had, they'll see the layers of infection in their life and the things that haven't quite undone from whatever treatment they've been doing before too, Yeah. So this process is for everyone, not just for kids, but it's, just getting right into the essence of the remedy and then the essence of the person and matching those together, which is what we do in homeopathy anyway, right?
Nice. And then when you give, I know there was someone in our group who was talking about they were working with a homeopath and then for kind of the neuroatypical, issue, and the child was getting worse, or it seemed like it was kind of aggravating. So to you, is that, what is a typical healing progress that you see? I mean, is it always better or is that work? I told her, I was like, every time I give my child a constitutional remedy, I always kind of wait for a weekend or wait for a clear week just to anticipate, things are going to be a little bit hectic. So is that kind of normal?
So I mean, I think you give the remedy when you're comfortable. And sometimes I will say to give remedies on the weekend so that there can be closer monitoring. But if I see a child who's having lots of aggravations, I will look at, okay, what's going on here? I do see children that have mast cell activation syndrome. So that's when the mast cells are dumping histamine into the body. And it could be from a variety of factors, but, it can kind of be chemicals or food or allergens or whatever that's triggering that. But those kids can be hyperreactive. And even with remedies, even with homeopathic remedies, which are diluted substances, they can be having these reactions. And so addressing the mast cell situation through, not just with histamine, but with remedies that show up to be quite sensitive. Even Ignatia can be quite a mast cell remedy. A lot of the insects, things like apis and that kind of thing, if it fits the picture, but a lot of the insects, because apis is a really kind of obvious response. But there can be other ones that other insects that are a little bit more subtle in what they do, but they actually help to calm the mast cell response. I did have a PANDAS kid who he'd had other treatment, but he had actually been, at the start of his PANS, he'd been bitten by heaps of mosquitoes. And then it triggered. So then he had, PANS, and so he was in this cycle, and he'd had a lot of homeopathic remedies, which kind of worked. Phosphorus had been really good for him, but he didn't completely kind of shift until I said, "Let's try Culex musca," which is the mosquito, and that shifted, and that family then went on to do some work on the mast cells with a biomedical doctor as well, and kind of looked at the histamine causing foods and that reaction in that boy's body, and then we were on the way, because that had been addressed, you see. And that's one thing. If a child is really reacting, like really super sensitive to a lot of remedies, that's one thing that you can kind of address and look at and yeah.
Oh, that's really helpful. And the last question, I'm sorry, I know I'm taking more of your time.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
It's all the rage. It's the TRS, like the zeolite, the heavy metal stuff, right? Is that, how does that play to you? Do you subscribe to that? Do you need it? Would you say homeopathy can do without it? How do you feel about that?
I think homeopathy can do without it. What I found, because I've done heavy metal testing and clearing heavy metals in people, in children and adults, I do actually, I don't mind TRS, but you don't go and just use, like, I know a lot of people are like, oh, the heavy metal thing. It's like when the probiotic thing was a thing, and everyone's taking probiotics. No, you shouldn't do that. Because really, we all have, we really need to, it needs to be prescribed according to your symptoms. It's not like a health thing. Oh, and also detoxing all the time isn't appropriate. And that it's appropriate at times, but it's not appropriate for everyone and all the time. Sometimes we need to rebuild, sometimes, and there are other ways, obviously, to clear heavy metals. I have had a child who had really high copper, and I think she'd done TRS and those things, but she hadn't cleared the copper. And so I did a copper protocol. Actually, I did a copper chelate with her, which is a copper cuprum metallicum in a 12C, 30C, 200C, and 1M in the same bottle. And she was sensitive, so she'd take it once a week, but she could have taken, some people can take it twice, some people can take it 3 times a week. So I got her to do that. I addressed some issues with their water supply, or they did, but I pointed it out. And doing the TRS for a period of time. And then we're monitoring how that's going and how that's bringing, and it brought the copper down finally. But the TRS didn't do that on its own. It was the remedy as well, hand in hand. But I don't always prescribe TRS. To me, it's like, it just really depends. You've got to look at the vital force, and you've got to look at what's going on for this person, and are they ready for this? Are their detoxification pathways open? enough to deal with this. But I think there's a place for TRS, but I do think it's not just for everyone.
Yeah, it's always on there. Anytime anyone says, it's like, oh, go check out the TRS pages. So they
Yeah.
have great stories, but you know,
Yeah.
I mean, I took it and I was like, I don't know about this. So I got
Right.
it very quickly, but yeah. So no, that's good to know
Yeah.
that homeopathy can work. Cause I mean, that's the other thing as well. Like I see the other modalities and I'm like, okay, like can homeopathy do this on its own? I think that's a big question. And again, coming from Joette, she absolutely gives you the confidence that yes, homeopathy can do everything. Like you don't need anything else other than nutrition. You know, so nutrition does play a part. Yeah, just to have confidence around kind of saying that to people. I'm like, no, you don't need much. You know, homeopathy is a great place to start, right? So
that's right. And I mean, homeopathy can do some amazing things, but sometimes, you know, like for this person at this point in time, they might need TRS, they might need chlorella. You know, I mean, I always find though that homeopathy is, you know, the easiest way to do things, right? You know, you don't like, especially with kids, you're not like trying to get, I've had kids that have come to me from biomedical doctors that have like a 2 pages long list of the supplements that they're taking every day at 6 a.m., at 7 a.m., at 10 a.m. We do this at 11, you know, it's just like, holy moly, that is, one, it's a full-time job. 2, it's exceptionally expensive. And 3, like, I'm not sure that that's the only way to do things. In fact, I know it's not. I know that I don't think that's always necessary. And you know, it's a big toll on the liver to be taking all these things a lot of the time.
Yeah. That's amazing. I am blown away. I'm so excited you gave those numbers because I know, who is it? Is it Liz Lalore who's like, I've got a 77% success rate on her fertility. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, these numbers are just enormous because I think IVF is like 30%, same, you know, like traditional.
Right.
And people are like, let's give gajillions of dollars to try these super harmful, super invasive, super disappointing things. And it's like, just try homeopathy. Like, I
know that 30% thing, that when I heard that, I was just like, what? That's okay for you guys? Like, right. Wow.
Yeah. Well, that's crazy. Well, I'm so excited. You know, thank you again for letting me interview. Let us know, how can we, I mean, do you have a limit of how many clients you can take, or like where should we direct people? How does that work?
Well, so I mean, yes, I do. I guess I do have, everyone's got a limit, right? And I am pretty busy, but I'm always, you know, happy to work with other people, or I have a couple of homeopaths who work with me here in Australia, but I also, with Angelica Lemke and Bridget Biscotti Bradley, we started Homeopathy Hive, which is homeopathyhive.com. And so there's a few of us there, and Angelica and I we supervise training homeopaths to come in and work with complex children's cases. So yeah, we definitely do a lot of that, so that we can see more people. So which is really great. And I mean, that's quite busy too, but we in Australia, my website is thefamilyapothecary.com.au. So, you know, if you're interested in, you know, I can certainly help out. And yeah, so we have there's those 2 options as well.
And then you have your podcast, of course, which is the Intuitive Homeopathy Podcast, which I think you have success stories from the moms themselves on there, right?
We do, yes. There's some amazing stories on there. If anyone's interested or has a feeling that their child might have PANS or PANDAS, or knows that they do, or autism even, and ADHD, I mean, these diagnoses that we box up, they all actually rotate around each other quite a bit. Yeah, we've got some brilliant stories in there of some of our clients and some of the mothers who really kind of embraced homeopathy and have had amazing shifts and movements in their kids.
Great. And then what was that book that you showed? It was Book of Life. Is that for the lay user, or is that for the professional, or?
Well, no, it's for the lay user. So this, you can get this through the Intuitive Homeopathy. So we also have a school that we've started called the School of Intuitive Homeopathy, and the website is intuitivehomeopathy.com. And you can get this book through there. So this is the chart book, but also Angelica wrote a book called Healing Complex Children with Homeopathy, and you can get this book through there. And this book was actually written for parents, and it's like an expansion of the Book of Life, which is the book of charts, but it's an expansion on, being a parent of these children. So parents often buy this book and they'll go through and have a look and go, oh, that's my child, and either work with their homeopath or start to work on their children themselves. Because as I said, any remedy that you give your child will be boosting their vital force. And sometimes, you might see an aggravation, and, you might want hand holding with a homeopath anyway. But we really, because we are so busy, actually, we want to empower the parents to use the remedies at home, get to know, we do have a lot of parents that use the Banerji protocols to support their kids through, all of the things that come, the physical things that come up, and then we're, holding their hands and helping them move through infections or, clearing vaccines or pharmaceuticals or, that kind of stuff as well, just depending on the child. So this book is really, really nice. A lot of parents love this book to kind of help them navigate these complex things, and also to start to feel a bit empowered, because having one of these kinds of diagnosis is such a shock and such a, what the hell do I do now? Managing for a parent to be able to help support their child at home and feel empowered to do that is just the most beautiful thing, I think. And I mean, that's with anything, right? It's even with fevers, and, to have an option other than, paracetamol, and those kind of things is just amazing. And we have so many options in homeopathy. It's not just, oh, they've got a sore knee, give them a Panadol. They've got a fever, give them Panadol, like Panadol. That's what we call it in Australia, paracetamol or acetaminophen or whatever. Yeah.
In that book, does it talk about, you said muscle testing as well, and the remedy, does it talk about potency and frequency as well? How do you guys decide that?
Yeah, it does talk about that. In terms of potency and frequency, we muscle test that as well. Or for me, I mean, I'm not, physically kind of moving my arm muscle testing. I'm just, resonating and getting a yes or a no. But yeah, I mean, it is individual. But, like I was saying, or I don't think I actually said this to you. I think I said it to someone before, but, I know my oldest son resonates with lower potencies. Like, that's just what I've learned over the years. And so, you'll start to notice that in your own child. But you might, I've actually, when I was studying, like, one of the things that we kind of learnt to be wary of was sulfur in a really high potency. And I stuck to that because I think my lecturers had kind of a weight on me. But I had a client where I muscle tested sulfur in a CM, and I said, and the lady, the mother was very, like, she'd done a lot of reading about homeopathy herself, and we'd had so much success with her child and with herself as well. And I said, I'm muscle testing sulfur CM, and I'm telling you this, and I'm scared of it, but that's my training, but I want to tell you that. And she was like, let's do it. I know she would, and it was amazing. Sulfur CM was amazing for this child. So, there's that kind of that accessing that, individual, what this body is telling me, what this person is telling me that they need, where they're resonating at. And that child actually from then does really well on really high potencies. So yes, it is muscle testing. But I think, in a way, as a homeopath, we all we don't just work with, you know, the posology kind of learnings that we've had. We all in some way are tuning into the person that we're with, or with our child or whoever, to decide a potency, really. I know that there's the protocols and you do that potency at that time, but, you know, a lot of the time we can go, well, maybe they need slightly higher than that now. Maybe they've had that and they need the next one, or yeah.
Yeah. So talk about your school a little bit. That's like
yeah.
a full, like you go from 0 to homeopath, or is that a specializing after you are already a homeopath?
So we have 2 courses. We have a course for homeopaths, like a post-grad study group in, you know, kind of learning about intuitive practice and how to integrate that into your practice. And then we have a 2-year course for parents. And that runs, so it runs for 2 years and it goes through all the remedies. But within that, there's a lot of, there's actually a lot in the course that you don't have to do everything, but there's a lot of extra support. And we have a couple of study groups that we run within it. So smaller groups within the course that people can attend and kind of bounce things off and talk to other parents about, or talk to other people about. And so there's 2 kind of pathways, but a lot of actually the consultants in the homeopathy hive, that a lot of them did that course, and they were parents of children with complex children's cases. So they did this course, and they'd done a lot of other kind of homeopathic courses as well, but they did this course and they then decided they wanted to help other people. And that's when we set up the hive. And so Angelica and I would supervising those cases and overseeing what's going on there. So so I've taken a long time to answer that question, but so we have options for practicing homeopaths and for people who haven't done much at all.
That's amazing. Wow. You guys have so many irons in the fire. It's awesome.
We do. I know. We kind of, like, a couple of years ago, Angelica, you know, was like, let's do something, let's collaborate. And I was like, we should do a podcast and we should do this and we need to let more people know about this. And, you know, because when I started working intuitively, the complex cases really that's when I really saw, oh yes, there's so much more movement here than what I was getting before. There's so much more scope and shift and healing, I guess, that's happening than what was happening before. So, you know, I just want a lot of people to have access to that. I really want, you know, parents to have access to, you know, not just to homeopathy, but also to, if they've got a really sticky situation with their child, or even with themselves and their health journey, then that there's a lot of people working like this, because it goes quite deep and the healing is quite wonderful.
Well, I'm so excited, and I really hope to be part of that movement and funneling a lot of people your way. So get ready.
Yeah. Yes, well, check out the Intuitive Homeopathy website and the courses and things, because it's really quite exciting. And so many people, I have a lot of my clients from here who started doing the course this year, and you know, they're just going, wow, you know, this is like, because, you know, I think for me, getting into homeopathy, I think I understand the world through homeopathy. And this course really kind of brings all that in. It's not just your straight, this remedy does this, and this is how you take a case, or this is how you find a remedy, this is how you repertorize. This is like understanding the interconnectedness between us and everything around us and how it affects us, because it does. And sometimes we're not kind of attuned to how it affects us, but it does. But, you know, all the substances that we have at our disposal in homeopathy is extensive and vast, and the healing that can happen through all of this, all these possibilities. But, you know, making sense of all of the possibilities as well is such a big thing, really. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much too. That was lovely chatting with you, and thanks for having me on.